During a filming trip in the snowy Sierra Nevada, we suddenly heard a faint growl rising from a 120-foot canyon. We thought it was our imagination, until a trembling mountain lion cub appeared and purposely led us forward. None of us realized that moment would drag us into a life or death rescue and trigger a reaction from the wild we would remember forever. The mist was still hanging low over the eastern edge of the Sierra Nevada when Ethan Hale stopped in the middle of the narrow trail. The cold air bit at his nose, and the pine needles beneath his boots were still wet with dew. Behind him, Lena adjusted the strap of her camera bag, while Miguel checked the battery on his camcorder, mumbling something about finally getting decent wildlife footage for their new documentary project. None of them expected anything unusual that morning. They were used to long, quiet hikes, hours of silence broken only by the distant rush of wind dipping through the canyon. But then it came, a sound so out of place, so thin and trembling, that all three of them froze. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the yelp of a coyote. It was a growl, but faint, young, unsteady. Ethan lifted a hand, signaling the others to stay still. The mist moved like a thin curtain across the rock formations, and the sound carried again, this time clearer, a small, wavering cry that didn't match the confidence of an adult predator. Lena stepped forward first. She was used to spotting distressed animals from years of photography work with nature reserves and even donations to wildlife insurance funds supporting injured species. She squinted toward a fallen cedar log, its splintered trunk half covered in lichen. Something was moving behind it, something small. Then, out of the haze, a shape emerged, a mountain lion cub, barely old enough to be away from its mother. Its fur was matted with dust and cold moisture, its tail dragging as it limped forward on unsteady legs. What stunned Ethan most wasn't the cub's appearance, but its reaction. It didn't flee. Mountain lion cubs never approach humans unless pushed by something stronger than fear. But this one stepped forward, then backward, then forward again, whining softly as if begging for them to notice. Lena inhaled sharply. Oh my God, Ethan, look at its leg. The cub's rear paw was swollen, raw from climbing across sharp granite. It wasn't just tired, it was desperate. Ethan crouched slowly, careful not to trigger panic. Easy. We're not here to hurt you, he murmured, even though the cub likely didn't understand anything except tone. It blinked, its pale blue eyes reflecting the early light, then turned its small head toward the fog-obscured ridge behind it. It stepped away, 2 trembling steps, then stopped and looked back at them. A clear gesture, a plea. Miguel whispered, "Is it trying to lead us somewhere?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He scanned the ground, noticing something deeply troubling. Tracks, coyote tracks, fresh and circling. Whatever pushed this cub toward them had been stalking it, and maybe something else. He felt a heaviness settle in his chest, the same feeling he had during his years assisting in rescue operations, where seconds could decide between life and tragedy. The cub let out another small growl, more urgent this time, then limped toward a narrow path cutting between jagged boulders. It wasn't running away. It was asking them to follow. "All right," Ethan said, tightening the straps of his pack. "Stay close. Something's wrong." The cub moved ahead, stopping every few yards to check if they were still coming. They followed through a cold corridor of stone, where the mist thickened and the air grew sharper. Their footsteps softened against the sandy ground as they entered a dry creek bed carved by centuries of flash floods. The cub limped across it and climbed atop a large, slanted slab of granite. That's when they heard the second sound, far weaker than the first, echoing from below. A faint cry carried up through the mist like a thread pulled tight. "Oh no," Lena whispered. Ethan felt the drop before he saw it. A thin layer of fog peeled away just enough to reveal the edge of a vast chasm, nearly 120 feet straight down, a canyon carved by violent storms and shifting stone. The cub stood at the brink, whimpering into the void, its small body shaking as the wind pushed at its fur. Miguel carefully inched forward until he could peer over the ledge. His breath left him in a single, horrified gasp. "Ethan, there's another one down there." Ethan knelt and looked for himself. On a narrow outcrop halfway down, a second mountain lion cub clung desperately to a slanted piece of rock. One hind leg was lodged in a tight crevice, its tiny claws scraping helplessly at the smooth surface around it. It let out a cry so thin it barely reached them. But something else caught Ethan's eye and made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. A shadow moved on the opposite ridge, a larger shape, watching them. Lena saw it a second later and grabbed Ethan's sleeve. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Ethan swallowed hard. "It's the mother." A full-grown mountain lion, lean and powerful, paced along the rocky ledge high above the trapped cub. She was limping too, a wound on her shoulder, dried blood matting the fur. She was frantic, torn between instinct and impossibility. She growled softly, a low rumble of pain and warning. Yet she didn't charge. She couldn't reach her own baby. Every attempted step along the crumbling ridge had likely caused rock falls, maybe even the very one that trapped the cub below. And now she was staring directly at them, her gaze burning through the mist. Ethan knew that look from countless emergency rescue cases. It wasn't aggression. It was fear. Fear deep enough to override the boundaries between predator and human. The cub beside them pressed against Ethan's leg, trembling violently. The trapped cub cried again from below. The mother lifted her head, eyes glistening with panic. Something in that moment pierced Ethan's chest like a blade. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a call for help. A situation no wildlife guidebook or survival blog or outdoor insurance plan ever prepared them for. He exhaled slowly, the cold air clouding in front of him. "We have to do something," he said. And for the first time that morning, none of them hesitated. The wind picked up as the first cub limped ahead of them, its tiny paws leaving uneven prints in the sand. Ethan kept a steady pace behind it, feeling the weight of what they had just seen settle in his chest like a stone. Lena and Miguel followed close, moving carefully across the shifting gravel that lined the rim of the canyon. The morning mist was thinning, but not fast enough. It moved like smoke between the rocks, hiding drops that could mean life or death. The injured cub paused again, glanced back at them, and pushed forward with stubborn determination that didn't match its fragile frame. Ethan's voice stayed low, calm, meant more for the cub than for the people. "We're coming. Just show us the way." The words, carried by the cold air, felt heavier than they should have. This wasn't the simple wildlife photography trip they had planned. It wasn't about getting footage for their documentary anymore. It wasn't about outdoor recreation or the kind of travel insurance companies like to talk about in adventure magazines. It was suddenly something far more human, an obligation they didn't quite agree to, yet couldn't walk away from. The terrain forced them to slow down. The cub led them through a narrow cut between two massive boulders, remnants of rockfalls from storms decades ago. As they squeezed through, the faint smell of sagebrush drifted past them, mixed with the sharpness of granite dust. Miguel scanned the surroundings with nervous eyes. "I keep thinking about that other cub. If it slipped any further." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Ahead, the path widened enough for sunlight to spill through. The cub climbed onto a shelf of stone overlooking a deeper section of the canyon, and Ethan could finally see what the mist had been hiding. A slanted trail of broken rock leading downward. Not enough to climb safely, but enough to tempt a desperate mother trying to reach her trapped baby. Deep claw marks etched the stone, evidence of repeated attempts. Farther down, the ledge with the second cub was barely visible, only a blur of tan fur and trembling movement. Lena lifted her camera, then lowered it again almost immediately. "I can't film this," she whispered. "It feels wrong, like taking advantage of something that's suffering." Ethan understood. He had worked alongside wildlife rangers long enough to know when a moment was meant for helping, not recording. A sudden rustle from above made all three of them look up sharply. On the highest ridge, a black shape moved between the rocks. A lone coyote, larger than the ones common in the lower valleys. Its eyes were fixed on the scene below, tracking every sound, every movement. It wasn't snarling or approaching yet, but its presence was a silent reminder that opportunity draws predators faster than compassion ever could. Ethan tensed. "We need to hurry, if that thing gets bold." The cub in front of them gave a distressed cry as if agreeing. They moved together toward the canyon's inner lip. The drop looked even steeper from this angle. 120 feet of jagged stone and shifting ledges carved by flash floods. The air here felt colder, heavier. Ethan crouched near the edge and peered down again. The trapped cub was getting weaker. Its calls were fading, its movements sluggish. He could see the leg tightly lodged between two slabs of rock, swollen from struggling. It wasn't going to free itself. It would eventually slip. The mother appeared again through the thinning mist, pacing along a ridge parallel to them. The injury on her shoulder was clearer now, a deep slice, likely from a fall or a defensive fight. Her breaths came in sharp bursts, visible in the cold air. But when her gaze landed on Ethan, something shifted. She didn't roar this time. She simply stared, tense but hopeful in a way only desperate mothers understand. Miguel swallowed hard. "She knows we're trying to help." The canyon answered with an echo, a long, hollow sound that rolled down the cliffs like a warning. Ethan stepped back, tracing the possible descent with his eyes. The rock was unstable. The drop was lethal. But there was no alternate route, no ranger station close enough, no rescue gear beyond what they carried. And every second they waited chipped away at the trapped cub's strength. "We follow the path she took," Ethan said quietly, pointing at the scrape marks along the ridge. "She tried to reach her cub from there. That means the rock at least held her weight once." Lena looked horrified. "Ethan, that's practically a vertical slide. One wrong step and you'll go straight down." "So will that cub," he replied softly. A gust of wind rose from the canyon, carrying the scent of pine pitch and cold stone. It whistled through the narrow crevices like a whispered countdown. The coyote atop the ridge let out a soft yip and began creeping closer along its vantage point. The urgency snapped into place like a pulled trigger. Ethan adjusted the rope coiled at his waist, checking the knots even though he already knew they were good. Lena steadied the injured cub beside her, giving it a reassuring touch it didn't pull away from. Miguel cleared loose stones from the area where they would anchor the rope, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. The trapped cub cried again, a thin, broken sound that echoed against the canyon walls. The mother lion lifted her head, her golden eyes shining with something raw and aching. Ethan stepped toward the edge, glancing back once at the others. "This is where it starts," he said. And for the first time, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The canyon seemed even deeper when Ethan stepped closer, scanning the jagged descent with steady eyes. Lena and Miguel worked quickly beside him, anchoring the rope around a thick juniper trunk that had grown stubbornly out of the rock. Its roots clung deep into the granite, giving them the best chance at stability. The injured cub stayed close to Lena's legs, trembling every time the wind rushed upward from the canyon floor. The early sun finally began to break through the thinning mist, revealing just how dangerous the rock formations below truly were. Ethan lay flat on his stomach and leaned over the edge again. Now that the light reached deeper, he could see the trapped cub more clearly. Its tiny body was pressed so tightly against the slanted rock that every breath looked painful. One hind leg was wedged deep between two slabs, and every instinctive jerk only made the stone pinch harder. The cub's claws scraped helplessly, leaving faint marks that told a story of hours of struggling. Its cries were getting softer, a worrying sign in young predators. Lena knelt beside Ethan. "Its chest is rising too fast. It's wearing itself out." Ethan nodded. "If exhaustion doesn't take it, the cold or the fall will." A sudden scraping sound echoed across the canyon. Miguel jerked his head up and pointed. The coyote had edged closer to a lower ridge, positioning itself for a better view. Its body crouched low, muscles coiled. Even from the distance, the intention was unmistakable. Coyotes were opportunists, and a weakened mountain lion cub was an opportunity it wouldn't ignore. Ethan felt his heartbeat thicken. "We don't have much time. If that thing comes down, the mother will charge, and that's a fight none of us want to witness." The mother lion appeared again, moving across the jagged ridge parallel to them. Now that the mist had faded, her injury was impossible to ignore. A deep gash cut across her shoulder, dried blood darkening her coat. She walked with a stiffness that betrayed pain. But her eyes never left the cub on the ledge. Each time the trapped cub cried, she answered with a low rumble, a mother's promise that she hadn't abandoned it. But she also didn't move closer. She had tried. The scattered stones along her ridge showed that. Loose gravel, disturbed dirt, claw marks. She had attempted a descent and nearly fallen herself. The injury may have been the price she paid for trying. Ethan tightened the straps on his harness, pulling in a slow breath. "I'm going down." Miguel stopped him. "You sure? This isn't some guided climbing tour. We don't have support, no rescue team, not even proper insurance if something goes wrong." Ethan shook his head. "If we wait, the cub doesn't survive. And if the mother loses another, she may come at us from fear alone." He wasn't wrong. Lena glanced at the mother lion again. The predator's tail flicked sharply at the tip, a sign of agitation. She was holding back now, but fear could change that in an instant. And fear in a wounded mountain lion was more dangerous than aggression in a healthy one. Ethan took the rope, tested its tension, and handed the tail end to Miguel. "Keep it tight, no slack. If the wind shifts or the rock gives way, you hold me, even if it drags you." Miguel nodded, his throat bobbing with nerves. With one final glance at the trembling cub on the ledge, Ethan began his descent. The moment his boots touched the slanted rock, dust and small stones tumbled into the abyss. The canyon swallowed the sound, turning it into a soft echo. He gripped the rope and moved slowly sideways, searching for footholds that barely existed. The rock face was smoother than he expected, worn down by decades of storms and the constant beating of winter winds. Every crack seemed too narrow, every ledge too shallow. Above him, Lena's voice broke through the growing tension. "Move right, Ethan. There's a wider spot by that patch of moss." He adjusted, inching carefully. The trapped cub noticed him now. Its body tensed with fear, but it was too weak to do anything except stare with wide, glassy eyes. Then a chunk of rock suddenly snapped off beneath Ethan's left foothold. His body swung out violently. The rope jerked, scraping against a sharp edge of granite. Miguel groaned from the strain above. Ethan's shoulders slammed against the rock wall, sending a burst of pain through his arm. For a terrifying moment, he dangled several feet away from the ledge, the canyon stretching endlessly beneath him. "Ethan!" Lena's voice cracked with panic. He forced himself to breathe. "Still here?" He called up, although his voice shook more than he liked. "Rope's cutting against something. Keep it steady." He pulled himself back toward the rock, using the last good hold he could find. His knuckles scraped, leaving faint streaks of blood across the stone. The mother lion above let out a sharp, guttural cry at the sudden commotion. She paced faster, her injured shoulder trembling with strain. The sound wasn't directed at Ethan. It was pure fear for her baby. He reached the ledge at last. The trapped cub whimpered, exhausted. Ethan pressed against the narrow surface, careful not to startle it. His fingers grazed the stone around the trapped leg. The crevice was tight, too tight. He'd need to push and lift at the same time, using just the right amount of force to free the limb without breaking it. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you. Just hold still." Above, Miguel shifted slightly to get a better stance. The rope shook. Ethan froze, gripping the rock until the movement steadied. Then he saw it. The rope was rubbing directly across a sharp edge in the granite, thin enough to slice fibers, strong enough to cut through over time. The frayed spots were already visible. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. Ethan exhaled, bracing himself. He placed one hand gently on the cub's back, then carefully rotated its trapped leg upward, pushing just enough to loosen the stone's grip. The cub cried out, a short, weak sound. The mother lion answered immediately with a roar that shook the canyon walls. The coyote leapt back at the noise, startled. But the leg came free. The cub collapsed into Ethan's arms, trembling but alive. Ethan held it tight, pressing it against his chest so it wouldn't slip. But when he looked up, his breath caught. The rope was now visibly slicing apart. One good gust of wind might finish it. "We have to go," Ethan shouted. And above, Miguel and Lena braced themselves, knowing the next few seconds would decide everything. The canyon wind slammed into Ethan the moment he shouted, whipping dust up from the ledge and sending it swirling into the void below. The cub in his arms shivered violently, its small ribs rising and falling too fast. Ethan pressed it tighter to his chest, using one arm to anchor himself to the rock, while the other held the remaining tension in the rope. Above him, Miguel and Lena were silhouettes against the brightening sky, braced with all their strength as the frayed rope strained under Ethan's weight. "Pull slow," Ethan yelled, feeling the rope jerk as Mick tried to shift his footing. "Steady, don't let it bounce." Miguel's voice echoed down, full of fear. "It's slipping, Ethan. The rope's getting worse." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't need Miguel to tell him. He could hear the fibers tearing, thin snaps like dry twigs inside a winter fire. Every sound tightened something inside him. The thought flickered. He had read enough survival blogs and even a few life insurance articles to know how quickly accidents in the wilderness turned fatal. But he pushed that thought away. Right now, he couldn't afford fear. He lifted his foot, searching for the same foothold he'd used to shift across the rock face earlier. The ledge crumbled slightly beneath his boot. Chips of granite skittered down the canyon wall and disappeared into the swirling mist. The cub whimpered, pressing its head against his jacket as if trying to disappear inside the fabric. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, tightening his grip. "I'm getting you out." The mother lion's presence hid him before he saw her. A powerful growl vibrated through the canyon, deep enough to rattle the air. She had moved closer, closer than she'd dared before. Now she was perched on a ridge only a few yards above the rope line, her injured shoulder trembling with effort. Her golden eyes locked onto him, filled with a wild mix of fear, pain, and trust she didn't yet understand. Lena's voice rose in a shaky plea. "Ethan, she's right above you. Don't make sudden movements." Ethan didn't look up. He couldn't. One slip of his focus and gravity would claim the rest. He pushed himself upward slowly, securing his boot into a crack no wider than a dollar bill. The rope creaked sharply, jolting his body downward an inch. Miguel cursed above, tightening his grip. Ethan fought the pull and lifted himself again, inch by inch, breath by breath. He felt the strain burning through his shoulders, the ache pulsing in his fingers as he clung to the rough stone. Come on," Miguel muttered through clenched teeth. Ethan looked up just long enough to judge the distance. He was still at least 12 feet below the rim. Too far for comfort, too far for mistakes. Another gust of wind hit, pulling the rope to the side. Ethan slammed into the cliff wall with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. The cub squealed, burying itself deeper, against him. The rope jerked violently, then made a sound Ethan never wanted to hear. A tearing snap. Not all the way through, but close. Lena screamed, "Miguel, hold him!" "I am holding him," Miguel shouted back, digging his boots deeper into the dirt. Sweat poured from his forehead despite the cold air. The rope was burning through his palms, even with gloves. Ethan forced his shaking legs to find another hold. He shifted his weight, pushing upward with every bit of strength he had left. He could feel his heartbeat pounding through his ribs, drowning out the roar of the canyon. He climbed. He climbed because he had no other choice. He climbed because the cub in his arms had stopped crying altogether. And that silence terrified him more than the fall. He climbed because the mother lion was watching, waiting, willing him forward. When his hand finally caught the next ridge, he felt Miguel yank upward with everything he had. Ethan's body lifted sharply. His boots scraped against the rock, kicking loose sand and gravel. He pulled with both arms, ignoring the burn across his muscles, ignoring the raw sting in his palms. He was getting close. Just a few more feet. Then the coyote appeared again, this time directly across the canyon, only a short distance from the spot where the mother lion stood. It crept along the ridge with deliberate steps, ears flattened, eyes locked on the cub in Ethan's arms. Its intentions were unmistakable. The mother lion spun toward it, growling so fiercely it echoed like thunder. She staggered forward despite her injury, every hair along her spine raised in a rigid ridge. The coyote hesitated, then ducked behind a cluster of rocks. But it didn't leave. It waited. Ethan saw none of it. His world had shrunk into a tunnel of rock, rope, and the fading strength in his limbs. One more pull. Just one more. With a final heave, Miguel and Lena dragged Ethan's arm over the rim. Ethan pushed with his last bit of strength, hoisting the cub higher so it wouldn't get crushed under his weight. His boots scraped onto solid ground at last, and the moment his chest cleared the ledge, Miguel grabbed his harness and pulled him fully onto the flat surface. Ethan collapsed onto the ground, clutching the cub against his chest, gasping for breath. The rope finally snapped in half behind him, the loose end whipping into the canyon and disappearing into the wind. Lena dropped to her knees, tears spilling freely as she checked both Ethan and the cub. Miguel fell back into the dirt, breathing in broken bursts as he stared at the shredded rope. Ethan lifted his head and looked toward the ridge where the mother lion waited. She stood motionless, her chest rising in careful, controlled breaths. Pain radiated from her wound, but her eyes were fixed only on the cub in Ethan's arms. He gently set the trembling cub onto the ground. The mother lion didn't move yet. She waited. He understood what she needed. Proof of safety. Ethan stepped back, and the mother lion finally began to approach. The world seemed to hold its breath as the mother mountain lion stepped forward, her paws silent against the sandy earth. Ethan instinctively moved back another foot, palms open, showing he meant no harm. The cub he had saved lay curled in a trembling ball on the ground, its tiny chest rising and falling in fast, shallow breaths. The other cub, the one that had led them here, whimpered softly and hobbled toward its sibling, nudging it with a worried urgency only family understands. The mother lion's golden eyes flicked from Ethan to the cubs and back again. Her injured shoulders shook under her weight, but she held herself tall, cautious yet controlled. Ethan could feel the raw power in her, even in that wounded state. The slightest misunderstanding could end badly, not just for him, but for everyone on the rim of the canyon. Yet there was something different in her posture now, something softer, as if she understood the line between danger and deliverance had shifted. Lena inhaled sharply when the mother lion lowered her head toward the rescued cub. The predator nudged its tiny face, pressing her muzzle gently along its back, checking every inch for wounds. The cub gave a weak cry, more of a whisper, but lifted its chin toward her. The tiny sound felt like a spark inside Ethan's chest. A reunion, fragile but real. Miguel let out a shaky breath. She recognizes it's alive. She knows. Ethan nodded, still keeping his distance. He watched as the mother lion groomed the cub's injured leg with delicate strokes of her tongue, somehow tender despite the sharpness of her teeth. Her movements were deliberate, steady, and filled with a kind of instinctive love no human could replicate. The rescued cub relaxed by degrees, its rigid trembling slowly easing under her touch. Then something unexpected happened. The mother lion stopped grooming and lifted her head again, this time looking directly at Ethan. Not at his hands, not at the rope, not at the ground, straight into his eyes. He had worked with wildlife before, had volunteered with rehab centers, and even supported conservation funds people sometimes discovered through financial planning articles or life insurance resources. But nothing had ever prepared him for a stare like this. There was no hatred in it, no territorial fury, just acknowledgement, a recognition that crossed the fragile boundary between species. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. He simply let her look. After several long seconds, the mother lion shifted her attention back to her cubs. The injured one attempted to stand, but nearly collapsed again. Seeing this, she moved her body to shield both cubs from the icy gust of canyon wind that swept across the ridge. Lena touched Ethan's arm lightly. "She trusts you," she whispered. "At least a little." Ethan let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing. But even as the moment softened, the reality around them remained sharp. The coyote was still somewhere above. The rope was destroyed, and they were far from safe ground. He knelt slowly, careful not to appear threatening, and reached for his backpack. The zipper rasped quietly in the cold air. He pulled out a small thermal blanket from his emergency kit, a thin, reflective sheet meant for hikers who got stuck in sudden storms. It wasn't fancy, not the kind you read about in high-end outdoor gear blogs, but it could help keep the cub warm until its strength returned. He placed the blanket near the family of lions, not too close, not too far. The mother's ears twitched, but she didn't bare her teeth or lunge. She simply watched, judging every inch of movement. The injured cub crawled toward the warmth instinctively. The mother let it. Miguel whispered, "That's as close as she'll ever let us get." But he was wrong. A few moments later, as Ethan stepped back to return to Lena and Miguel, the mother lion did something none of them expected. She turned away from her cubs and walked, slowly, limping but steady, toward Ethan's backpack. She nosed the flap open with surprising care and pulled something out between her teeth. Ethan's breath hitched. It was his climbing glove, the one he had torn off mid-descent when the rope began shredding against the granite. He hadn't even realized it was missing, but she had found it, and she carried it toward him. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Miguel froze, camcorder forgotten at his side. The mother lion stopped just a few feet from Ethan, close enough that he could hear her breathing, close enough to see the dust clinging to her whiskers. She lowered her head and placed the glove on the ground gently, like setting down something fragile. Then she stepped back, never breaking eye contact. It wasn't affection. It wasn't gratitude in the human sense. But it was something, a gesture, a signal that she understood, at least in the way wild creatures understand bonds forged in desperate moments. Ethan whispered, I think she's giving it back." No one moved. No one dared disturb the fragile piece. The mother lion returned to her cubs, positioning herself protectively around them. For the first time since the ordeal began, the canyon didn't feel so cold. The wind softened, the sunlight reached farther across the ground, and the tension that had stretched their nerves to breaking finally loosened. Miguel slowly lifted his camera, capturing the moment with a reverence he'd never felt before. "People won't believe this," he murmured, "but they'll feel it." Ethan picked up the glove, dusted it off gently, and swallowed the knot in his throat. As he stood there, he realized the truth that would stay with him long after the canyon winds faded. Some connections aren't spoken. Some are earned. And some arrive wrapped in fur, fear, and the silent heartbeat of a creature who knows you chose to save what she could, not reach. And in that fragile space between danger and trust, he felt the story shift towards something even deeper, something waiting on the other side of winter. The canyon had one more chapter left for them. Winter had come early to the Sierra Nevada the following year. Thick snow coated the ridges and turned the winding trails into quiet white corridors. Ethan hadn't planned on returning, not really. But when the documentary project received new funding and a grant connected to wildlife preservation programs, he, Lena, and Miguel agreed that their next shoot should begin where the previous story had ended. Something unfinished lived in that canyon. Something that drew them back like the steady pull of gravity. The wind was sharper this time, slicing through their jackets in thin, icy breaths. Miguel adjusted the hood on his parka, while Lena shielded her camera from drifting snowflakes. Ethan walked slightly ahead of them, not rushing, but with a certain purpose. He still carried the climbing glove the mother lion had returned to him that day. It had become a symbol of trust, of survival, of a moment no insurance policy, no outdoor safety guide, no wilderness training course could have ever prepared him for. a reminder that some moments in life exist completely outside human plans. They reached the familiar overlook just before noon. The view was transformed. The canyon below was no longer brown and jagged, but a sweeping basin of white and shadow. The snow softened everything, turning sharp edges into gentle curves. The wind echoed through the hollow, producing a deep hum that resonated like a distant memory. Ethan stood at the rim, gloved hands resting on the pack strapped to his shoulders. Lena and Miguel spread out behind him, scanning the distant pines for signs of movement. "Does it feel different?" Lena asked quietly. Ethan nodded. Different, but the same, like the canyons breathing slower. He stepped closer to the edge and exhaled as the cold air burned his lungs. For a moment, he wondered if the lion family had moved on, if the mother's injury had healed, if the cubs had grown, if they remembered anything from that desperate morning a year ago. Mountain lions traveled constantly. Their territories shifted. The wilderness was wide, merciless, and full of predators. He didn't allow himself to expect anything. Then Lena froze. "Ethan," she whispered, pointing toward the tree line on the far ridge. "Look." 3 tan shapes emerged from between the snow-covered pines. They moved with fluid confidence across the hillside. Strong, steady, unmistakable. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. A mother mountain lion in full winter coat stepped out, followed closely by 3 near-grown cubs. Their shoulders and haunches were powerfully built now, their movements smoother, their bodies larger. One of them paused, lifting a front paw with a slight, familiar hesitation. The cub he had rescued. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stood there as the family descended the ridge with silent grace, winding through the drifts and granite outcrops. They weren't rushing. They weren't hiding. They weren't avoiding him. They were just living, existing in the same space at the same time once more. The mother lion stopped at a clearing about 100 yards away. Snowflakes drifted down around her like floating embers. Her breath rose in soft clouds. She looked directly at Ethan across the frozen valley. The recognition wasn't human, wasn't sentimental, but it was real. In the animal world, survival carved deep impressions, memory shaped by instinct. And instinct was telling her that he was the same human who had once stood between her cub and the canyon floor. The rescued cub limped forward a step, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. Ethan felt something warm rise in his chest as the snow crunched under his boots. He didn't approach, didn't call out, didn't do anything that might break the fragile boundary of respect between them. He simply lifted the climbing glove from his pack and held it loosely in his hand, letting it hang in plain sight. A soft gust of wind carried his breath out over the canyon. The mother lion blinked slowly, lowering her head just slightly. Not a bow, not a gesture of thanks or human emotion, but something close, something honest. Then she turned and guided her cubs toward the line of trees on the opposite slope. Their bodies flowed through the white haze like moving shadows, disappearing one by one between the pines. Only when the last tail vanished into the forest did Ethan release the breath he'd been holding. Miguel murmured, "We just witnessed a miracle." Lena wiped tears she didn't bother hiding. "No, we witnessed continuity, life moving forward." Ethan looked down at the glove in his hand. A year ago, it had nearly been ripped from him by a dying rope and a 120-foot fall. Now it felt like a quiet reminder of something deeper, an unspoken link between 2 worlds that rarely met except in conflict or tragedy. But on that single day, in that single moment, trust had found a way to bridge the gap. They packed their gear slowly, not speaking much as they began the return hike. Snow crunched under their boots, and the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the white slopes. The canyon behind them seemed peaceful now, curling into the mountains like a page finely turned. Halfway down the trail, Ethan stopped and glanced back one last time. A single set of paw prints crossed the ridge where the mother lion had stood. Next to them, smaller prints, 2 from healthy cubs and 1 with the faint drag of a leg that had once been trapped between stone. 3 trails, 3 survivors, 3 lives intertwined with theirs, even if only for a heartbeat in the endless rhythm of the mountains. As Ethan turned away and followed his friends down the snowy path, he felt the kind of quiet that settles deep in a person's chest. Something like peace, something like respect, something like truth. In the cold silence of the Sierra Nevada, he realized the canyon had never really taken anything from them. It had given them something instead. A moment, a memory, and a story that would outlast winter itself.